Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev. Today we're continuing to learn about the exciting world of data structures, so that hopefully one day we can make better and cooler things. Now last time we shifted focus from DS lists to DS grids in order to create our grid-like inventory system. There was a lot of learning and redos, but we ended up with a great solid foundation before running out of time. And we're picking things up right where we left off with our plans for today, focusing on fixing our general grid code. Once we've got that figured out, we'll start to focus on interactivity and hopefully start manipulating the grid data by the end of things. Now that sounds like a plan, right? And again, much like previous episodes, I'm providing post commentary for your benefit, especially today's episode, which requires so much focus that I couldn't even have done live commentary if I wanted to get as far as I did. So let's get to it, shall we? The first thing I did was immediately fix the main thing that kept confusing me all last episode. I added an extra entry to the data grid. As mentioned last video, the data grid ended up being similar to a 2D array, and the problem was we needed to keep track of 3 variables, not 2. This caused a ripple effect, making everything much more confusing than it needed to be. So after adding the 3rd grid entry to our data, it was time to translate that into our visual grid. After some restructuring, I was able to draw the cell number, which is very important, the item type within the cell, and the amount of that item type. And finally, our holy trinity of data has finally been translated properly. Oh! The next thing was to figure out how to keep track of the data via the mouse position. Since we're now accounting for cell numbers, with some quick math, it was easy to identify a cell and its contents. But to hold on to this data for future use will require a few new variables. I started by recording the data for whatever cell the mouse was currently hovered over. With the data basically queued at this point, I tested manipulating data by having left click reset our target cell amount and right click adding one to our cell's current amount. So at this point, I had finally managed to gain a solid grasp on utilizing the grids. Being able to reset and add/subtract from the grid was great, but a grid-based inventory has so much more going for it, and this is where I had to focus, and I had to focus hard. With basic mouse functions working and data manipulating possible, I wanted to tackle one of the more complicated aspects of grid inventories: stacking. But in order to do this, I had to first obtain and keep track of cell data. Now with grid inventories in particular, holding left click and moving the mouse acts as if the player is dragging an inventory object. Again, because I'm trying to accomplish as much as possible with as few instances as possible, this is a little more complicated than, say, checking for collisions. So initially I thought to keep track of the mouse's X and Y coordinates every few frames. If the positions were different enough and the player had the left click held, the mouse would be considered quote-unquote dragging. I eventually realized this was complicating things way too much, so instead I started to restructure my current code. Since I was already checking for a cell within the confines of the menu, it meant I could move the cell data check outside of those parameters. I then added a mouse check to the left click, and if there was data to record, mark it. The problem now is that if we got the data to drag, we needed to record that data for future use when the mouse leaves the cell. So I recorded the drag data to 2 new variables. Now in case you need a refresher, here's how it currently works. We keep track of the mouse position to determine our current cell target. That target references a grid of data, which is actually more of a list of rows of data. The target cell's data is then recorded as temporary reference data, and if the mouse is detected to be quote-unquote dragging, the data is then recorded to 2 other variables temporarily. Got it? Good. So, while this all worked as I hoped it would, one issue popped up immediately. Because there's no margin between cells, dragging data would reset, even when data has already been recorded. Luckily, this was fixed pretty easily by moving the data recording code to the initial left click instead of waiting for the player to leave the cell. And adding the cell position to the recorded code was the last thing we'd need to make this all work right. Now, heading back to the outside the cell portion of our code, I set up a simple data check. I decided to just check for one piece of data because at no point should only one piece of our data grid be recorded at a time. So if the data exists and we are dragging said data, we need a visual feedback that it's quote-unquote no longer on the grid. So first I recorded the reference data for the target cell, then I reset the cell's data to null. And to add extra visual feedback, I then drew the name and the item amount to the mouse position to complete the quote-unquote drag effect. And unfortunately, that's all the time I had for this episode of Let's Dev. Again, this took a lot of focus because of just how much information had to be kept track of. And no doubt, this could be much easier with more objects/scripts involved, but I'm stubborn and this is actually providing me with some pretty great learning experiences anyway. Plus, I've already got a list of things I want to do next time, so I'm pretty excited to keep at it. But for now, if you like this video or enjoy Let's Dev in general, be sure to hit that like button. If you aren't already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get notified when new episodes go live. And as always, be sure to leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.